This is Kevin Pruitt interviewing Priyanka Kedia on the fifth episode of Rising Tide Startups. Priyanka, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
That's great. It's great having you on. I just want to tell our listening audience that you were the first person that reached out to us when we put out the kind of the all call for guests on the show. So I really appreciate you stepping out and stepping up to the plate and being the first one. And I wanted to make sure that you were in our early list of people that we could connect with, and as we got our schedules together, and today seemed to work out well. So give me a little bit of just a quick background of who Priyanka Kedia is.
Hi, so I am Priyanka Kedia, founder of Ayva Jewelry, based out of San Francisco. And just a little background about me. I started my business 2 years ago. And prior to starting my business, I used to work in corporate America, work for companies such as Safeway and Treasury Wine Estates, managing their brands and their inventory. So I have also, my other part is I have a CPA degree from India. But I decided after I finished and I got my degree, I decided that this was not for me. So, so that was an interesting change. So my life has been kind of, taking different paths along the way. And I'm finally now a new founder, and I am loving it. Along with being a founder, I also have two young kids, aged 5 and 10.
Wow. And their names?
Aisha and Varun.
Okay. So Aisha's 10 or Aisha's 5?
She's 5.
Okay. All right.
Varun's 10.
The princess.
Yes.
Has to be in that order. Has to be. Well, I have to tell you, in university, I was an accounting major for 15 minutes, so I feel the pain of crunching numbers.
See, I love numbers, and I was an analyst too, so I love doing the numbers, but I think the biggest mistake I made was early on after I graduated, my first career move was to become an internal auditor, and I think that's the route that you follow when you're in India, and I think that was not the right pick, because that was such a dull and boring job. Sorry, anyone else who's listening
Apologies to our auditors, yeah.
It wasn't for me,
right.
So I wish I'd done... not started with that, started down that path. And I really decided because I started doing that, it was just, I realized it wasn't for me.
Right.
But it helped me a lot in a way that I love numbers and I still do. And that's still my forte. But I just, not being a CPA is basically what I'm not doing right now. So.
Well, nothing's wasted, and we'll touch when we circle back on your business. You can touch on that a little bit, and it's really interesting. I mean, as proven by time. I mean, you obviously have a creative gene in you that the auditor itch wouldn't scratch. It just wouldn't allow that kind of outlet. So give me a kind of a 1-minute elevator pitch on Ayva Jewelry.
So Ayva Jewelry is a fine jewelry brand creating jewelry inspired by my Indian heritage. Our pieces are designed to make women feel beautiful and powerful.
And the name of the business was inspired by?
So that's why the order of my kids. Ayva is AY for my daughter Aisha and VA for my son Varun.
Okay. All right. So you didn't have to search very hard to make sure that name wasn't taken, probably.
No, I didn't have to search very hard, but it took me a really long time to figure it out. I'm not very good with picking names, just an FYI. I had a hard time picking my kids' names too.
Hey, I don't think that's a weakness. I think that is universal. I mean, virtually everyone that I talked to said that they struggle more with naming their business sometimes than even naming their kids. So how difficult that is, because it's one of those things. It's like naming a child. You think, I've got to live with this
for the rest
of your life. So,
exactly.
You want to be very careful on what you name your business. You want to make sure you can get the .com or, the web address or whatever. So, well, give us a little more background on the business. Is it an online business? Is it brick and mortar? Is it both?
So I'm doing primarily it's a B2B business. So what I'm doing right now is I do have an online presence as well, and I do sell some pieces through my website, but my primary business is selling to retailers around the country. So I do have around about 10 retailers that I sell through right now.
Okay. Now, for all of our listeners, we don't assume anything. B2B is business to business.
Sorry, business to business.
Right.
Yes. So I'm a wholesaler. I just wholesale to these other retail stores. So they're small. There's some small, some larger, obviously, but they're smaller stores, and I wholesale jewelry to them, and then they end up selling retail.
Right. And these are more like high-end boutiques that are in urban centers, or where are they located normally?
So they're all just all over the place. It's just wherever a jewelry store is. Not necessarily, I don't have anyone. Well, I have one store that's in a mall, but it's a very high-end store.
Right.
So it just depends on the location. And I guess they kind of obviously pick their locations based on the demographics as well. So it just, it varies by region and by city.
So how long has Ayva Jewelry existed? When did you start the business?
So I started this 2 years ago.
And since then, what has been kind of your ideal that you had in mind as far as growth, as far as, goals that you had in mind? And have you met those? What are one or two goals that you really said, okay, before I start this is what I really want to achieve? Not necessarily financial. I mean, you can discuss those if you want to, but what are some, goals that you had in mind? Yeah. What are some metrics?
So basically, I had no metrics in place as such for my non-financial goals, but I knew what I wanted to do when I started my business. One is because, so just to give you a little background as to why I started my business is I used to keep going back and forth. Like when I was working in corporate, I had some really, really good jobs, and I had some really, really bad ones. And my last one was I was miserable. And I just knew I wanted to do something for myself, but I could never figure out what I wanted to do. And maybe I was like too afraid to take the chance, or I was just, first of all, it's like, there's so much in just the fear of the unknown. And I think that's what it was for me. Just making that leap, just figuring out, it's so easy being in corporate, and you can easily get a job because I worked in corporate for 10 years. So for me, that would have been an easier transition. But going back and forth, I was like, okay, I need to start something. I always had all these creative ideas, but nothing ever stuck. And then my last job that I had, I quit my job and literally sat home for a little while because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And in the meantime, my grandmother passed away unexpectedly, and I was very close to her. But I inherited some of her jewelry. When I did, it kind of helped me through the healing process in a way, because I felt like a part of her stayed with me forever.
Right.
Right. So when I got those jewels, I knew right away that this is what I wanted to do. And this is the message I want to spread. And I want to tell people it's not jewelry to me is not just an accessory. For me, it's such a powerful object because it holds life's best memories, honestly. I remember my grandmother wearing wearing her jewelry and just walking around, just being there. So it always I always have those flashback memories whenever I see it. So that was one message that I knew that was my goal when I started my business, is to spread that message. The other thing was to empower women. The reason I say empower women is because I took a long time to try to figure out what I wanted to do. And I was always afraid of the end result and just afraid of the unknown, as in, being thinking that, yes, I have a stable job, I have a steady source of income. I have to leave all of that, and now I have to go dive into my own business that I don't know what to do and how to start, or even know where to begin.
Right.
So my whole goal is to spread that message as well, that you need to stop figuring, stop worrying about the outcome, but figure out more about, think more about the journey, because it's the journey that's the most important thing. Right. So for me, I don't know I have an idea as to where I want to take my business, but I don't know where it's going to be in the next 10 years.
Right.
I'm going to strive towards it, but I'm going to grow in the process while I am growing my business as well.
So you've started this a couple of years ago, and you may have just had, this may be a difficult question to answer because you may have really just experienced kind of an upward trajectory, virtually for the entire time you started the business. But what would you say would be one, maybe your lowest point that you faced since you started the company?
So I was actually thinking a lot about that question, and the lowest point for me would be probably, like I said, not knowing what to do all the time, And my biggest challenge was I've always been on the back end of the business in all my previous jobs. I've never been on the front end. And now by front end, I mean being on the sales side of the business.
Right.
So that was
Not
something
necessarily
that,
the creative side, the creation side of things, but actually the sales delivery. Okay.
exactly. So where, like, that's the bread and butter of the business. It's like you have to sell. If you don't sell, you can't, like, you can do all you can in the back end, but, it's not going to turn the wheel. So basically, that was my biggest challenge, one. Second, I think my lowest point would be when I first started my business, there were a lot of people who said that this was not for me, like when my jewelry was not for them. So when I heard that, I think I took it personally. But knowing that it's not going to be for everyone, it took me a while to figure that out. Also figure out that when someone says no, it's always a maybe. And that is probably your next question. It's like that was my highest point, that revelation, that when just knowing and believing that when someone says no, you always have to think of it as a maybe, because it's never a dead no for anything.
Now you mentioned, and I'm kind of following up on this what you're just talking about as far as maybe the lowest point. Let's touch on that first. You said the lowest point was there were people that said this jewelry style is not for me or whatever. Can you tell me, was that ethnically driven? Was that a broad clientele that you were pitching this to, or were you primarily pitching this to an Indian market? I mean, what was the response, I guess, or more broadly, just tell me about your business more broadly as far as the customer base.
So my customer base is just any jewelry store. It's any jewelry store that you would walk into to go buy jewelry. It's not, it has nothing to do with ethnicity or any of that. It's not, so the reason, let me backtrack on that a little bit. So the way it works is with the jewelry market is there are some stores that are focused primarily on bridal. And by bridal, what I mean is just basically they just have, their customer base is one that will only come to the store to buy their engagement rings. What I do is more of fashion jewelry.
Right.
So that basically is another set of customers who have disposable income and come in and buy fashion jewelry. So there are two different market bases, and figuring that out was the difficult part in the beginning, because I've been around the jewelry business, but I didn't know, like I hadn't been running, like turning the wheels and like doing everything myself. So it took me a while to figure that part out, that it wasn't meant for everyone in that aspect, that the bridal stores obviously do not have that customer base that has the disposable income, who will come in and buy fashion jewelry as well. And there are some stores that are just primarily focused on customers who come in repeatedly, buy, and they're collectors. And that's where my jewelry fits in.
Right. That was what I was going to ask you, is that, I mean, the bridal, I guess, market would tend to be more of a one-off purchase. Exactly. You're talking about more the cyclical, the repeat customer, whatever.
Exactly.
Great. Well, let's move on. What would you say would be one or two obstacles that you really have faced in the first couple of years that we could maybe help speak into, the listener base could speak into, possibly to help you get over that hurdle a little bit? What are one or two things that you've identified?
So my biggest challenge, my struggle is I am a bootstrap founder. So being bootstrap is I'm pretty much doing everything. So when you're doing everything, my biggest struggle is time. And basically, I think my brain capacity is the second part.
You are a mom of two kids, too.
Exactly.
You got a lot of mind share going on there.
So exactly. So between the two, I think those two, starting my business, that's been my biggest challenge. Like I've worked in corporate, I worked for 12 hours a day, but at the end of the day, I could just come home and I could check out.
Right.
It was just so much easier. Now I feel like it's 24/7. Like I keep a notebook next to my bed, because there are times, like today in the morning, I woke up at like 5:30 and I had this thought and I had to write it down, because I used to think that, you know what, I'll remember when I wake up, and I never do. So now whether it's like 5:30 or 3 or whatever it is, I'm always like, taking notes, or I'm doing something. It's always on my mind. So I think that has been my biggest struggle.
So really the time. What you mentioned there is really it's kind of a founder secret that says, always have a notebook with you, because as things come in your mind, that's the kind of the whole idea behind, say, Evernote or OneNote or whatever, is this idea of just this constant notepad, going. But I do the same thing. I have a notepad beside the bed that if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with something in your mind, it'll serve two purposes. You'll remember it. And the second thing is you can almost check it off the list and let your mind now go back to rest and go back to sleep, because you've kind of taken care of it.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I understand. I understand fully. Was there any other obstacle that came to mind that other than really the time and just balance, I guess, of being a one person shop?
The other thing that actually is not knowing what to do. And I think initially when you first start, like, the one advice, obviously I will talk about that later too, is just, you need a group of people around you, and you need that support group to help you through this process. People, or find your, basically people who you can help you. But initially, I think my struggle was I didn't even know what to ask them that I need help with.
That's
because
good.
you don't know all the questions. Like, you
Right.
don't know everything. You don't even know what to ask. So just trying to, luckily, thank God we have Google now. So you could Google everything, but it's just the initial struggle and the initial phase of, like, getting over that whole hump where, yes, you've now found your people, but what do you do, and how do you help? Like, how do you ask your people the right questions to help you? So that was a big struggle initially for me. It still is to a certain degree whenever I'm doing something new. But the good thing is, when I know what I've already done is easy now, because I've already
Right.
done it. I've learned through it. But every new step along the journey is the same. It's the same bump that you have to go through, where, yes, I'm here. I want to get here, and I need people to help me, like, figure out what I need to do to get here, but I don't even know what to do to get to that point. So
Right.
it's a lot like learning along the way.
Now,
And
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
and I'm sure that that's why people always talk about, like, listening to other people who've been through the journey, and, like, reading books and going through their process, because it helps you get to that point. And I try to do that, but I feel like a lot of businesses have their own struggles and their own challenges.
Right.
So even though I follow that path where I'm, like, reading about other people, other entrepreneurs. I listen to a lot of entrepreneurs too, but everyone has their own set of challenges. And I think there's never basically one model fits all sort of, process for anything. Yes, you can get a generalized idea as to what you need to do, but what's specific to my business is only going to be specific to my business.
So, what were some groups that you reached out to? Were these Facebook groups? Were these, like, jewelry specific groups that you reached out for help early stages?
Yes, there's some people I reached out to in the jewelry industry initially, because I wanted, obviously, I wanted that feedback. I do have a family, so my husband and his family they're also in the jewelry business, so I do have them as some support as well. But that was what I did initially to get over that initial phase of knowing what I need to do and how do I step into the waters and wade the water, essentially. But after, now I'm at a stage where I don't want to hear what else is going on in the jewelry industry, because what happens is when you basically just listen to people in your industry, you kind of, like, just turn the wheel the way they're doing it.
Exactly.
So my whole goal is not to be involved with anyone in the jewelry industry and just, let that go on the way it is. But, listen to other people, like, listen to other businesses and listen to what other people are doing and see how I can incorporate that into my business. So
Wow.
I do go to a lot of groups with tech founders and with anyone for that matter. Like, I really don't, like, it doesn't have to be the jewelry space. Like, I try to but I try not to, get myself so involved in the jewelry space as such, because of that same reason, is because I don't want to follow the herd.
Rising Tide listeners, I hope you really listened to that, what she just said, because that is universally great advice to any of us that are starting out, that sometimes we can get so myopic that we're looking within only our industry. And especially I would think like the jewelry industry would, it has such a long heritage. The tech space would be completely different because it changes so quickly, and it has to be so creatively rapidly changing in essence. And I really appreciate you touching on that. And I hope that will, I hope that our listeners can hear that and apply that even to their own businesses, that, step outside of your industry, step outside of the genre that you're involved in to really to broaden that kind of gene pool, that you're drawing from. So so let's take a shift here, and let's look more at what we would call kind of the deep dive, the life quad section of our interview. So tell me one person that you would follow online that would really inspire you.
So for me, the biggest, it's Bill and Melinda Gates, and they really, really inspire me in terms of what they've done and how they've created their legacy.
And their foundation, yeah.
Exactly. So for me, it's not, yes, money is obviously it's an essential part of everyone's life, but I feel like at the end of it, we all have to leave our legacy, because no one's going to really remember us for how much money we've made or how big of a house we had. No one's going to remember that, but they're always going to remember you for what you've left behind and what you've done for other people.
And just the legacy, yeah. I appreciate that. So tell me a special life quote that really inspires you and you try to live by. I mean, actually, you said, I have to go back and listen, but you said like 3 or 4 different things I would love to capture again that were, little one-liners that were really inspiring. But is there one in particular that really inspires you?
Yes, there's one that I have it all over, like on my mirror, but it says, if not now, then when?
Wow, if not now, then when? Exactly. So was there a source for that?
It was back to when I started my business, and it's just basically just inspired by my own story of why it took me so long. And like, I couldn't have been happier than I am right now. And I feel like I'm accomplishing something for myself. It's been a struggle. Obviously, everyone knows who starts their own business. It's not a walk in the park. It is struggles, and there are ups and downs in businesses. But the thing is, you feel satisfied because you've done everything on your own. You've learned everything on your own. You've struggled through, you've found your own answers. You've done everything on your own. So I am really, really happy, feel very satisfied with what I'm doing. So my whole motto is, now it's like I never want to waste as much time as I did before. So always think about it that way, that if not now, then when.
Well, that kind of ties into I've mentioned this quote on a couple of other episodes that Reid Hoffman said, who created LinkedIn. He said, if you're not embarrassed with your first iteration, you waited too long.
Exactly.
So, this idea of it will never be perfect. So let's launch and iterate, and kind of that lean startup mentality. And I've tried to take that approach with the podcast. I mean, there were a lot of things that I would have loved to have had in place before we launched, but I had January 1st in mind, and I said, we are going to go live if I have to interview myself. So about all that, I come up with a lot of obstacles.
You sometimes have to do that. Like, going back to this point, it's when I started my business, it took me a whole year of planning before I did it. And I wanted everything to be perfect. And then I applied to the design competition, and I luckily won, and they gave me a free exhibit space. So in December is when I found out that I had to exhibit in January at a trade show. And I had nothing ready. So I remember it was such a scramble because I was trying to perfect everything, but everything was like in my notes, not executing anything. So it's going from December, when everything's shut for the holidays, everyone's closed. I remember in January, I got my business cards on the Friday, and I was leaving that Saturday morning. And that's when I got my business cards to go to a trade show, to attend a trade show. So it was just a lot of scrambling. It wasn't perfect. But you know what? I did it. I just I just scrambled, and sometimes you just need that fire under you. And I'm so glad that I applied to that trade show, because that was the best thing that happened to me. Otherwise, I would have waited and waited and just taken longer to perfect everything. And nothing is ever perfect. Like
Right.
you just have to give up perfection. Like
Yeah.
that's just, you know,
There is a
crazy.
good enough, you know, versus a perfect. So, I mean, when you were talking about that, I don't know exactly the name of the principle, but there's a business principle that talks about you will expand the work to the amount of time allotted. And I'm thinking as we have urgent deadlines, we tend to, you know, work better under those kind of stress points. And you had that stress point with that exhibit that said next month you're going live. So
Exactly. And then imagine like my pieces are not ready, and like getting everything, like scrambling and like trying to find everything, get everything ready. And I got everything done in a month. But I'm sure my launch date was technically the summer of that year. And it would have taken 6 months to do the same thing I did in 1 month.
yeah, and amazing. Yeah, you probably
Exactly.
didn't sleep much that month though.
Oh no, I didn't. But it was amazing.
So
I got everything
one thing you
done.
didn't touch on, just to clarify, are you doing this alone? Are you and your husband doing this together, or is he doing something else in the jewelry business? What's the
So
kind of
yes,
basic foundation?
so we're doing it separately. It's not the same. We have yes, we're both in the jewelry business, but our business models are completely different. So he does more of the bridal side of the business,
Okay.
and he has more traditional customer bases. So what I'm trying to do is, like I said, my whole business concept is focused more on not just jewelry, but like spreading the message of what jewelry can do for you. So
Hmm.
it's not just not something that you just buy as an engagement ring or any of that, but it's more like it's purposeful jewelry.
Right.
So it's slightly different. The concept is different, and I'm just trying to expand on that right now.
Well, is there, just as we're wrapping up, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would love to just kind of as a closing statement, to any unique tidbit that I haven't asked you about that you want to say? Yeah, I'd like to really make sure this is included. So.
So the only other thing I would say is I always tell people this, and I learned this the hard way too, sort of, but just ask people for help.
Hmm.
And you'd be surprised at how many people are willing to help you. And I've met amazing people along my journey, not necessarily only in the business, but outside of my business. And they're all willing to help. They're all willing to go out for coffee with you and give you advice and just ask. You aren't supposed to know everything. There's no way you can know everything.
Yeah.
No matter how long you've been in business, you just can't know everything. So you always have to be open and be, aware of the fact that you have to ask.
Well, that is a great way to wrap up our interview, and it has truly been a pleasure to talk to you today. And how can our listeners find you? How can they find Ayva Jewelry? What's the best place to look?
So you can send me an email on info@ayvajewelry.com. And
That's
that would
ayvajewelry.com.
yeah.
Okay.
And that would be a good way to reach me, or you can even send me a direct message on Instagram or Facebook, and I'm here to help. I haven't come this far without people helping me, so I am more than happy to help anyone or answer any questions anyone has.
Well, I can speak by experience. She's very responsive on Facebook Messenger, and has really helped out in preparing for this interview as well. So, okay, Rising Tide, it is now your turn to speak into this, and the two obstacles have been identified. They will be on our feedback form on the website. That I would love for you to speak into this, and we'll make sure that Priyanka is provided with the feedback report within the next week or so. And once again, Priyanka, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you, and we just hope that your business is extremely successful, and that beyond that you can successfully share the message that you intend to share through this business. So as we close today, we just want to always remind you that, guys, this is the basic premise behind this podcast, is to help each other rise, because all boats rise in a rising tide.
Very good. Thank you so much for having me, Kevin.
Thanks.